Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Before we begin tonight's program, we have a few housekeeping announcements to make. Restrooms are located at each end of the concourse in sections 5 and 6, and then 12 and 13. No photography or video work is permitted during the event. Masks must be worn at all times. And please submit your questions for the Q&A seated, and I will deliver instructions from the podium, just to be on the safe side. Again, thank you all for being here tonight and joining us, and please welcome Provost Campbell.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us tonight. I think you're in for a great treat. Wiley Cash has been called a gem of a storyteller, someone with vibrant imagination who engages in vigorous research to write books that are sensitive, breathtaking, intimate, suspenseful, heartbreaking, expansive, nuanced, gorgeous, and I think I could go on. We are extremely proud of Wiley and his great success, but perhaps not surprised. It is representative of the tremendous impact that UNC Asheville has on its students, and it is representative of the long-standing tradition of excellence of our Department of English. While not necessarily having a hand in the instruction of Wiley in particular, I want to recognize the faculty we have at the institution today, helping to shape the future Wiley Cashes at this institution and in this state and in this nation. I don't know if there are any existing current faculty of the English department here now, but if there are, could you just kind of wave? I don't know if anybody is here. There are a few. They look like they're gathered right here. So thank you for all that you're doing. Yes, we can clap. Thank you. Just as importantly, I am confident that praise for When Ghosts Come Home, describing the work as a perfect novel for our present moment, for providing a brilliant portrait of how we arrived at the present, exploring race, class, greed, and how close we've always been to both the dangers that never hid themselves and the danger we didn't see coming. All that praise would not be possible without an exposure to the full interdisciplinary breadth across the arts, history, social sciences, and more that is the hallmark of a UNC Asheville experience. And we are delighted to be building on these strengths as we work to develop a Wilma Dykeman Writer-in-Residence program, a low-residency MFA program in creative writing, and so much more. I look forward to UNCA saying more about these efforts in the near future. But for now, let me refocus our attention on the events of tonight. We are incredibly fortunate tonight to have with us Graham Sharp. Songwriter, banjo player, singer, guitarist, and 20-year member of the Steep Canyon Rangers. Graham Sharp is a Grammy Award-winning artist who calls music a unifying force, a force for positivity. With that, it is my incredible great honor to introduce Graham Sharp.
Thank you, Kai. Thanks, y'all. Thanks to Wiley for having me out here tonight. It's really special. I had we can talk about it later, but I did have the opportunity to read the story a couple little while ago, so I'm going to sing you a song right now about how it ends. Is that all right? Now I'll do you a song here. This is one, Wiley's mentioned in the green room that this is one that is one of his favorites, and he likes it so much he can't listen to it. So I think that's a compliment. Not sure. It's called Honey on My Tongue. You're gonna leave, I better get used to that. Thought I might watch your back all the time. You introduced me to a whole wide world. It lights up the way I do when you walk up smiling. Open me right up, find the joy of way too much, find the pain of never enough, dance in their dance, arm in arm, circling around this room, like the sun chasing the moon. Yeah, you open me up, I'm in my bare feet, standing in the clover, I got you buzzing around my head. I don't care if I get stung for a little bit of honey on my tongue, for a little bit of honey on my tongue. You can't keep a secret or leave a keepsake on the shelf. Every little bit of yourself, you give it away. Is it mine to tell that you ought to go carefully? Baby, leave that care to me. Run along and play. I'm in my bare feet, standing in the clover. I got you buzzing around my head. I don't care if I get stung for a little bit of honey on my tongue, for a little bit of honey on my tongue. In my bare feet, standing in the clover. I got you buzzing around my head. I don't care if I get stung for a little bit of honey on my tongue, for a little bit of honey on my tongue, for a little bit of honey on my tongue. You're gonna leave, I better get used to that. I thought I might watch your back all the time. Thanks, y'all.
All right. Hello, readers and UNCA students, faculty, and guests. My name is Elizabeth DeVito, and I am a senior and creative writing major here at UNCA. I'd like to welcome everyone to the launch event for the fourth novel by UNCA writer-in-residence and all-around cool guy, Wiley Cash. Tonight we are here to celebrate the release of his newest book, When Ghosts Come Home. I should probably take this off. When Ghosts Come Home, a literary mystery set in the 1980s in southeastern North Carolina about a mysterious plane crash and the investigation that ensues when a dead man is found by the runway. But beyond the mystery, the novel is also a story about family, community, and the ways in which the larger world can trickle into our personal lives. Wiley Cash's books infuse crime fiction elements with thought-provoking themes about justice and the ways in which history can bear a striking resemblance to the present. His past three novels have been Southern Gothic love letters to North Carolina, set in various points in the state's history. From one community's encounter with a sinister preacher in A Land More Kind Than Home, to two sisters taken away by their estranged father and the deadly man that follows him in This Dark Road to Mercy, to one woman's harrowing real-life fight for workers' rights in The Last Ballad. And now, with this new book, he'll take us to the North Carolina coast in 1984 and introduce us to a local sheriff torn between politics, family, and the violence around him. Along with being an author, Dr. Cash is a creative writing professor here on campus, one who has had a great impact on me in particular. I think I speak for a lot of my fellow creative writing students when I say that Wiley Cash has been an indispensable mentor and has been a crucial figure in the writing journeys of myself and other writers here at UNCA. When I first arrived at UNCA as a freshman, I assumed that I had learned everything there was to know about storytelling as a craft. But as soon as I entered one of his creative writing courses, he opened my mind to a wealth of knowledge about literature that I hadn't even known. And with his warmth and humor and wisdom, I'm happy to say that in the 4 years since joining this campus, I've grown so much as a writer and as a person, and I'm sure I'm not the only student who feels that way. And so, without further ado, I'd like to turn our attention to the man of the hour, Dr. Wiley Cash.
I hope this is being recorded. I know it's being live streamed, but I also hope it's being recorded because I want to hold on to those descriptions of me. Wisdom, I think you said, and humor, and a couple of other things that a lot of people, especially my wife, might not associate with me. Thank you so much, Kai and Graham. I'll get to you in a moment and that song. And Elizabeth especially. I remember when I first met Elizabeth, it was the spring, I think, of 2018. She came up to look at the campus, and her mother and father, Robin and Dan, were with her. And I sensed in her some of the things that I would like to think were in me when I was a young person wanting to become a writer, which was a hunger for knowledge, curiosity, a willingness to try new things, and that has certainly been borne out in my time working with Elizabeth. She's a wonderful student and a wonderful literary citizen. Right now she's interning with WNC Magazine. She's got a collection of short fiction coming out soon, and so it's amazing to meet a student on the way in and see these great successes and then be there on the way out, which is going to be as tough as it is exciting, I think. There's a lot of amazing things going on in the English department at UNCA, and I just want to talk about a couple of them before I'm going to read maybe like 150 pages of this book. We'll set the score clock on, the timer, probably for 3 hours. We'll see how much I can get done. Just to give you a sense of it in case you want to purchase it, and then you can read the rest of it at your leisure, but at least you'll have the opening 150 pages read to you tonight. But I want to talk about a couple of things that we're doing here at UNC Asheville. Something that I'm really, really excited about is this year we have created a common word community read. We are going to focus on one book a semester here as a UNC Asheville community, and we would like for all of you to join us. The book that we are focusing on this fall is Isabel Wilkerson's wonderful book, Cast. Many of you know it. If you don't know it, you've seen it. But it is an incredible study of the way caste has influenced America from its very foundation. And throughout this semester, we're gonna have a running conversation on Facebook. You can just go to Facebook, the Common Word Community Read, type that in, you'll find it, ask to join, we'll let you in, we're letting everybody in, it's not like a really exclusive club. But there'll be a running conversation there, but we're gonna have lectures that are gonna be live streamed throughout the semester. And our first lecture is a week from today, Tuesday, September 28th at noon. Ellen Holmes Pearson, who's a professor in the history department, is gonna talk about the role of caste in America's founding documents. And it's gonna be a fascinating discussion, a fascinating lecture. So we hope you'll join that reading community, and you can live stream at your desk. Maybe you're back in the office, I doubt it, but you can watch a lecture about caste in early America next Tuesday at noon, and I hope you do. It's a great time to be part of this community here at UNC Asheville. There's a lot of exciting things going on here. And at UNCA in our classrooms, we think outside the box. They let me be outside the box. I'm very fortunate that they have kept me here as part of this community for as long as they have. A lot of people may know, but some of you may not know, I began here as a student in 1996, and I've served a lot of roles since then. But teaching is my favorite role that I've served so far. The parties aren't as good, but it's rewarding nonetheless. And I want to talk about a couple of things that my colleagues are doing. My colleague, Dr. Evan Gurney, is teaching a class on medieval and early modern Europe. And he is teaching about poverty, he's teaching about law, and he took his class to a downtown poverty walk. And they were able to trace the ways that these abstract ideas that they're learning in the classroom about medieval England, about early modern England, are manifested in contemporary America. That's fascinating work, to be able to take students from the abstract ideas of the classroom to the streets of the city that they're calling home for 4 years or maybe for the rest of their lives, and asking, what are we doing? What's changed? What is the value of discussing this in the classroom? My colleague, Dr. Amanda Ray, her students in her professional writing course have just written a $5,000 grant for the Asheville Poverty Initiative that was awarded from the North Carolina Humanities Council. And so these students in professional writing are getting incredible experience and reaping the rewards of that for their community through this grant writing. Since 2013, this course has averaged $1,000 a semester in successful grant writing. There's just an incredible amount of energy and excitement in our department right now. And I think that it's becoming apparent. This past year, we've had the highest number of applications in the history of the university. And to me, that is absolutely thrilling. I think the hard work by the staff and the faculty, the administration, is getting out into the larger world. And the secret of UNC Asheville is not going to be secret for very long. There are a lot of good people here, and a lot of them put this event together tonight. A book takes a lot of folks. When you write a book, like when I wrote this book, I wrote a good bit of it, or rewrote a good bit of it during the pandemic. It was super lonely, and I got a lot of work done. But then when you publish a book, you have an editor and an agent, and a sales team, and a marketing team, and publicity, all these different people. And so it takes a lot of people to bring a book to market. And it takes a lot of people to put an event on like this as well. So I want to thank Brian Davis, I want to thank Colleen O'Neill, wherever she is, and the advancement team for putting this event together. It really means a lot to me. When Graham, before he sang the song Honey on My Tongue, he joked that I was never able to listen to it. And I want to tell the story of that briefly. I was really fortunate to have been invited to write the media kit for the Steep Canyon Rangers' last studio album, Arm in Arm. When I say I was invited, I pretty much forced it on them and asked them, and then stood outside their houses in the rain beneath a street lamp looking in their windows with a sad face, and they let me do it eventually. And I listened to that album. I was telling Graham tonight, I probably heard that album more than they have. But one song, and I had seen them play that album live as well. It is a fantastic album. For folks at home, I don't know which camera I should look into, you can do two things at once on the interwebs. You should download this album while we're streaming tonight. This is an incredible album, Arm in Arm by Steep Canyon Rangers. But that song was always tough for me to listen to because it's about a father
with a child and knowing that child's going to grow up and that child's going to leave. I can't even hardly say it out loud. And the lines that always got me in that song were, the pain of never enough. The lines are slipping out of my mind. What is it?
Joy of way too much.
The joy of way too much and the pain of never enough. And that is the crux of being a parent. The joy of never enough and the pain of way too much love, the joy of never enough time. And that's where I find myself. I've got 2 little girls. I hope they're watching tonight. My daughter Early is 6. My daughter Juniper is 5. I've got the cards that Juniper made me in my pocket here, and I've got Early's Lucky Rock in my pocket right here as well. So if they're watching, I hope that they're finishing their dinner and they'll be in bed before the event ends. I want to say hello to Mallory as well. I'm sure she's saying, "Eat, girls, I'll leave it on if you eat. If you don't eat, I'm going to turn it off." But writing this book, When Ghosts Come Home, was a way for me to try to understand my daughters. We moved down to Wilmington. I was living in West Virginia in 2013 when I first began working on my 3rd novel, The Last Ballad, which I know all of you have read, and had lines from tattooed on various parts of your body. But I was living in West Virginia when I began working on that book, and we moved back to North Carolina to the coast in Wilmington in 2013. And that's where my wife Mallory was raised. And it felt so foreign to me, because I'm not from Wilmington. I was raised in Gastonia, went to school in Asheville, and spent most of my life in this part of the state. And Wilmington felt so strange and so unknowable, so distant and so alien. Like literally alien, like alien weeds in your yard. And I joke that in Asheville, you can pick up a shovel of earth and like a lavender bush will grow, right? And on the coast of North Carolina, you can pick up a shovel of earth and like bees will sting you. And like an alien weed with tentacles that stinks will grow overnight. And you're like, where am I? It's like, being out in the jungle somewhere. And I felt so foreign, that landscape felt so far to me. And then we had 2 little girls that were born there. And it dawned on me that my daughters are going to grow up in a landscape that I don't understand. I wasn't raised around the ocean. I wasn't raised around boats. Spanish moss looks itchy to me. I don't find it comforting. The Azalea Festival comes and goes, and the tourists come, and it doesn't seem very remarkable to me. But this is going to be part of my children's lives because they were born there. It's in them the way that the western part of North Carolina is in me. And I have this great fear, and that's why Graham's song, Honey on My Tongue, has always resonated with me. The pain of never enough, of not having the time to catch up to them. That eventually, their understanding of Eastern North Carolina is going to surpass my understanding of Eastern North Carolina. There's going to come a time in their lives when they are more at home in that place than I am. And there's going to be something unrecoverable, perhaps, that comes between us. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll just fix that by writing a book set there. And I thought, if I'm ever going to know this place, I need to know it through the lens of writing about it. When I teach creative writing, I encourage my students, I was talking to my creative writing class just last night, write the story that only you can write. There's a story that only you know. There's a story that's inside you that's not anybody else, and the place that you are from is worth literature. A lot of my students, I'll say, where you're from? Oh, I'm from some, town nobody's ever heard of. But why is it there? What's interesting about it? Nothing. Well, why do you hate it? Because of this? Well, that's interesting. Write a story about that, right? The places that we are from are worth literature. And so in writing this book, I was trying to understand something about Southeast North Carolina, about its history, about its people, about its geography. And then I remembered this story in 2013. I was at an event at ECU, and I was at a library, and I was talking to a guy in the back of the library while the event was going on. I wasn't part of it. I was like getting coffee during the event. And he said, where do you live? And I said, we just moved down to Wilmington. And he said, what took you down to Wilmington? And I said, well, my wife's from there, and my parents live down in Oak Island, and shout out to my mom. My mom's probably watching this as well, Sandy at home, if she can get the internet to work.
My mom's always like, Zoom just doesn't work for me. I don't know. I guess it's a glitch. When they designed it, they were like, Sandy Cash, we're just gonna cut her out. Just on a top down, just we're coming for her. Hopefully YouTube works for my mom. But I told this guy, I said, my mom and dad lived down in Oak Island, and he said, oh, I lived down in Oak Island in the summer of 1970, whatever. He said, did you ever hear about that plane that landed at the airport out there? And I said, no, I didn't hear about that. And he said it was this enormous plane, and it landed on this grass runway, and the plane was so big, it was too big for the runway, and it ran off up into some trees, and they had to hire a stunt pilot to come out to the airport and fly this plane off this runway that was too short. And it was super dangerous, but it was this big historical, cultural moment in the history of Oak Island. And at that time, I was writing The Last Ballad, and I was in the weeds in that novel. Spiritually, every way you could imagine, I was in the weeds on that novel. But that story of that airplane being too large for a runway just stayed with me. And it just kind of nagged the back of my mind, just thinking, there's something about that that interests me. There's something about that that feels like it needs to be explored. And I never really explored it because I didn't want to. I wanted to explore it in my mind. And I didn't want to know if it was a true event, I didn't want to know about it. If it wasn't a true event, I didn't want to know about that either. I just wanted to think about it. And so while I was writing The Last Ballad, I began working on a short story about a sheriff who arrives in the middle of the night and finds this aircraft that's too large for the runway. And what does he do? What's going on out there? And then all these other elements began to come into my mind. And I thought that I would begin tonight by just reading, like I said, the first 150. Then we'll take a break. The bathrooms are up there. Then we'll come back. We'll play the audiobook during the break. It'll be queued up to where I stopped. And then we'll come back. I'm just gonna read a quick scene. This novel opens in the fall of 1984. It's late October, just before Halloween. And a local sheriff named Winston Barnes, 63 years old, is awakened in the middle of the night when a low-flying aircraft passes over his house. And he knows there's no good reason for a plane of this size to be coming in at that time of night, certainly not on this strip of runway that is grass, that is short. And so he gets out of bed and he drives out to the airport to see what's going on out there. And I thought I would just read from that moment of what he finds. He's out on the runway in the middle of the night. Later, when he would think back on this moment, Winston would realize that he had been able to sense the enormity of the airplane before he even arrived and saw it for the first time. It sat sideways at the very end of the runway. Its silvery body was perhaps 20 yards long and its wingspan easily 30. Up close, it shimmered beneath the faint moonlight like a mirror. The two huge propellers on either wing stilled like closed eyes, as if the airplane had been sleeping when Winston found it. The cargo doors on its right side thrown open like a breathing mouth that sucked in air. Winston did not know much about airplanes aside from his brief brushes with them while serving in Korea. But he knew this airplane was old, perhaps a World War II relic, and that it had been too large for this runway. And that was why it sat in the position it did. A quarter of the way into a full turn the pilot must have made to keep it from plunging into the trees just beyond the runway's end. The rear landing gear snapped in half and the tail resting awkwardly on the ground. Winston unholstered his pistol and stood with it down by his side. "Hello?" he called. He waited, but all he could hear was what seemed like the sharp, tinny silence of the airplane's presence. "Anybody in there?" He only raised his gun when the bouncing beam of a flashlight caught his eye. Someone was coming across the grassy field from the parking lot on his right. Winston turned in that direction, and that's when his eyes fell on the body of a black man lying on the grass alongside the runway. In the scattered beam of the approaching light, Winston saw that the front of the man's shirt had been blown wide open, and his chest was dark and damp with blood. The man's eyes were open, but it was clear to Winston that he was dead. He trained his pistol on the approaching flashlight, and he wondered who had shot the man on the ground in front of him. Wondered if that same person was approaching him now. He was surprised by the night's turn of events, but in that moment, nothing in him was scared. He was simply ready. So early on in the book here, our sheriff has a couple of complications. He's got a crash-landed airplane that's been abandoned. Later on, they're not even able to find fingerprints inside the aircraft. And he's got the body of a local man who he knows. He knows this guy. He knows this guy's dad on the runway. Who flew the aircraft? Who left it behind? Who killed this guy? And was this guy associated with this crash-landed airplane? He's also facing some challenges at home. His wife is sick with cancer. And he's afraid if he doesn't win this tough re-election battle, that they're gonna lose their health insurance. And he doesn't know what that's gonna mean for his wife. Out of nowhere, his daughter, who's 25 years old, she returns home, fleeing this heartbreak that she can't even quite put words to. So he's got a lot of pressure at home. And he's facing this tough re-election battle, and the man running against him is the son of a very wealthy land developer. He's a land developer himself. He's a soft-handed daddy's boy who's never really worked that hard, but he's got a lot of money and he's got a lot of power, and now he wants to be sheriff. And when the word gets out that this airplane has crash landed, we got to keep in mind that it's 1984. Rumors of drugs begin to circulate, and the body of a black man is on the runway. And so race is introduced, primarily by the sheriff's challenger. And so this small town of Oak Island, Southport, this tight-knit community becomes a powder keg of history and uncertainty and suspicion and rumor, and all of it is driven by these tendencies to blame people that we have marginalized, which is certainly what the sheriff's challenger is trying to do. When I wrote this novel, I was thinking about the many things that have happened over the past 5 or 6 years here in America, the many ways that racial history have come to bear on our contemporary moment, the way that many of us have had or have not had very tough conversations, and the way that politics are so central to our perception of so many things, whether it be masks or vaccines, how politics has become centered. And how in the 1980s that wasn't necessarily the case where I was raised in Gastonia. Where I was raised in Gastonia, and nobody's laughing when I say Gastonia, so I appreciate that. Well, you can do it now because I encouraged you to. I had an event years ago in Shelby, and I got up and I said, it's great to be back in Shelby. My dad's from Shelby, I'm from Gastonia, and people in the audience kind of chuckled. I was like, not tonight, Shelby. You're Shelby. You don't make fun of anybody. Sorry, not tonight. You might have had Earl Scruggs, but that's not enough. Not tonight, Shelby. But where I was raised in Gastonia, if you were middle class and you were white, then you were probably Republican. If you were Republican, you were probably Christian. If you were Christian, you were probably Baptist, and all of these things were just assumed. You loved Ronald Reagan, you loved Jesse Helms, and you didn't ask questions, right? All of those things about my childhood were implied. Those political beliefs, those cultural beliefs, those identities were just implied. They weren't even discussed, they weren't investigated, they were just implied. And now those things are so much more explicit. How we feel about politics, how we feel about the cultural moment. We say it with the yard sign, Black Lives Matter, defund the police, I back the blue. I wear a mask in the grocery store, I don't wear a mask in the grocery store. I wear a red hat or I wear a different hat, right? These political ideologies and identities are so much more explicit than they were in 1984. And so in this novel, there are many instances where characters have tough conversations about the things that I would like for us to have conversations about now. Race, identity, class, gender, history, memory, equity. And that's what I was thinking about. And Speaking of tough conversations, I'm going to ask Graham to play a song from his new solo album, which just came out a couple of months ago, called Truer Picture. It's a wonderful album, but he has a great song called My Neighborhood that speaks to some of the things and some of the conversations that I was trying to have and get started with when Ghosts Come Home. And after this, Graham and I are going to talk a little bit, and if y'all have questions for me or Graham, I would love if y'all ask a few questions. And also I want to say that I recognize so many of you in the audience, I think, but all of you have masks on. So if you come up, please tell me who you are. Because I see your eyes and I'm like, I think that's Lauren. Where are you? But I don't know for sure. Maybe it's not.
All right, this is I live over in West Asheville, over there in Asheville School, and just got digging into the local history right around there in my neighborhood. About a year ago, wrote this little song called My Neighborhood. Say that'll never happen in my neighborhood. Well, damn if it can and damn if it could. It already has and it will again. Yeah, my neighborhood's got the same old sin. I dig 5 inches down in this pretty green grass, and there's a layer of cinders and broken glass. Nobody asks who struck that match when the church house burned down to nothing but ash. I dig another 5 inches in the cold hard clay. There's arrowheads still draw blood today. They were no use when the rifles blazed, forgotten on the Trail of Tears where they lay. They say that'll never happen in my neighborhood. Damn if it can and damn if it could. It already has and it will again. Yeah, my neighborhood's got the same old sin. Augusta, Georgia's just a normal town. The heat's so heavy it'll hold you down, with the knee on your neck and your face on the ground. I used to trust Augusta, but I don't right now. And I don't trust the history that I learned in school. I don't trust that I'm not just somebody's tool, on the right side of luck when they made the rules, on the wrong side of right and made me a fool. Say that'll never happen in my neighborhood. Damn if it can and damn if it could. It already has and it will again. Yeah, my neighborhood's got the same old sin. I say that'll never happen in my neighborhood. Damn if it can and damn if it could. It already has and it will again. Yeah, my neighborhood's got the same old sin. All right. Thanks, Brian. All right.
I got my cheat sheet out. What do you want to talk about? You want to talk about tough conversations and writing my neighborhood?
Yeah. So I mean, that one, actually, kind of the root of that song was a little bit of research. One of my neighbors dug up from the papers here at UNCA. There's a historian, I can't remember his name, but he has one of those silver historical marker signs over in East Asheville. And apparently right there in my neighborhood, there's a Cherokee scout buried under a oak tree that General Rutherford's troops poisoned the creek right there, right where I live, when they were coming through to eradicate the Cherokee. And so yeah, one day a couple falls ago, we walked over to this oak tree, and sure enough, there's a mound right next to it where apparently this brave, his friend, a couple young men, his friend, they knew he was dying, and he buried him sitting up to watch over this little part of my neighborhood.
Wow. What was the line about burning the church house down? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, what burned down in my neighborhood was a hotel. Some neighbors were digging a fire pit, and they started hitting teacups and door hinges and stuff like that. And it was the old, what was the name of that? It was Sulphur Springs Hotel over there. But I think kind of given our history, it's just as likely it was, something more violent than that where we are. So yeah, that was kind of sort of for dramatic purposes.
Well, can you talk about, and I can talk about it too, like being, especially a white, we're both in our mid-20s.
Yeah.
Thank you. Early mid-40s writers from the South who write songs, and I'm writing books. How do you feel like the South comes to bear on writing a song like My Neighborhood?
I mean, for me personally, like that moment was I'm referring to, Black Lives Matter, George Floyd seeing that, the videos of that. I mean, that was a real moment of reckoning.
Sure.
For me personally, and I mean, being from the South, maybe that took too long.
Yeah.
But that was my way of, putting in the words like, well, first, rather than saying, what's wrong here and what's wrong everywhere, like looking a little bit closer to home.
Sure, totally. It's so funny that you say close to home. I remember when the chancellor here, Nancy Cable, was installed. It probably was like this spring of 2019, maybe. I can't even remember exactly when it was. She said that information technology, the internet, and all of those things has made it easier for us to know what's happening in Europe than it is what's happening in our own neighborhood, whether it be school board, county commission, city council, and all of these things that are going on under our nose. We don't care about because they're not on CNN, and we just look at CNN and we don't look at what's going on right around us.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
I tried to make an effort to like read the Raleigh News and Observer.
Yeah.
Every couple of weeks, just to know what's happening in Raleigh, because that really comes to bear. Us being in North Carolina comes to bear on us as much as anything that happens in DC.
Yeah. When I was working on this, Black Lives Matter had been going since, I guess, Ferguson, really, the effects of Ferguson with Michael Brown down there. And then after George Floyd, I was still working on this, and a lot of that reckoning that you mentioned went into this. And the sheriff in this novel is our hero, but like us, like me maybe, he always wants to do the right thing, but sometimes the right thing is like super uncomfortable and super awkward and all of these things.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, there's, not to give away too much, there's a line in there where he says, between being a good person and a good sheriff.
Yeah. The legal thing and the ethical thing are not always the same thing.
Yeah.
And having these tough conversations, I think you and I talked about it after you read it. There's a scene in the novel where the sheriff's challenger, this guy Bradley Fry, is going on night rides in the black community. And a night ride goes back to like Ku Klux Klan, night riders. And they're flying the Confederate flag, they're revving their engines, they're shooting guns in the air, they're shining spotlights into people's homes. And the residents are terrified. And one of the residents is a man named Ed Bellamy. He's a local history teacher at the high school. He's a civil rights leader. He spends all day calling the sheriff's office, trying to get the sheriff on the phone. And eventually he shows up at the sheriff's office and it's like, why haven't I heard from you? What are you gonna do about this? And the sheriff says, what are you talking about? And the sheriff realizes that his secretary, this woman that he's known for 15 to 20 years, hasn't given him the messages about what happened the night before. And so the sheriff goes out to the secretary and he says, who
answered that call last night. And she says, well, Deputy Englehart answered it. He says, where's the report? And she says, well, he didn't write me. And he says, why didn't you give me these messages? Why don't I know about this? And Vicky, this woman who was known for 15, 20 years, she says, because there's no law against driving around. And in that moment, the sheriff understands that their relationship is never going to be the same. That her sense of justice and his sense of justice and who the law works for and who the law doesn't work for is so skewed that they're never going to come back together. And those casual intimacies of a work colleague are always going to be colored by that interaction. And have you found yourself having those tough conversations or those tough moments?
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that happens. It happens a lot, among people that I know professionally.
Sure.
For the most part, in those contexts, I just avoid them.
Yeah.
But in the book, we talked about it, it's such a subtle moment, and it's not a lot of drama, but that was the part of the book that destroyed me, because I think as like somebody who hasn't been exposed or part of or around like night rides and the really more dramatic parts that are in the news of racism, those little moments are kind of what we're probably more exposed to, and that little part of that book crushed me, and it made me think, as kind of writers and how we deal with the South, it's that situation, and I don't know if you ever had it or, one moment that was that much of a crux, or if it was kind of a slow thing, but sort of coming to that realization, well, okay, maybe I have misjudged this situation, and if I misjudged it, maybe I'm somehow culpable.
Oh my God, yeah.
And if I am, and if that's the case, where do we go from there?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. One comes to mind right now. Several years ago, my wife and I went down to a plantation in South Carolina that some friends of ours were getting married on. And we felt uncomfortable about it. A scene of great human tragedy. Right now in class, Graham and I were talking about Jason Mott, who's a friend of mine, has a new book out called Hell of a Book, and in the book he mentions that the South is America's longest running crime scene. Because crime scenes stay up until the investigation is over and the trial has begun and there's been a conviction, or there's been, not a conviction, and none of that has happened in the South. It's still a crime scene. We haven't even begun the investigation of what plantations meant and what slavery meant. We haven't looked at that part of our past. But there was a moment where we were staying, where I was in the main house, and there was a woman who was kind of the docent of the property, and she was telling me about it, and I said, I went to school in Louisiana, and that's really my only contact with plantations, being from this part of the state, there were not a lot of interaction with plantations. And I said, I studied under Ernest Gaines, who was my mentor at school in Lafayette, Louisiana, and he grew up on a plantation. He was born in a sharecropper's cabin. He went to school in the church, and then after he got a MacArthur grant and sold this best-selling novel, he went back and bought part of the plantation and built this house and moved the schoolhouse to his backyard and reclaimed this land. And the docent said, well, that's exactly what happened here. Mr. So-and-so's family founded this plantation. They lost it during the war, and then 20 years ago, he came back and bought it. It's like, it's not exactly. Those aren't the same at all, right? Those aren't the same at all. Those aren't even slightly similar. And those are those kind of conversations where you're like, how do I respond to that? What do I do with that? Can we talk about writing it? You wrote most of this album during the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
What was that like?
Well, usually I write a record and kind of sit on the songs for a while and all that. But it felt like I just needed to record them and you'd make it happen. So I'd never made a record independent of the Steve Canyon Rangers before. But it felt like the songs were just timely and needed to happen, and I think they sort of run the gamut of, you know, what I think a lot of us were, which especially for me traveling, and you know, there was moments of great contentment, like being home and really and feeling that, and then obviously moments of terrible fear for kind of what we were facing, and a lot of it, you know, was paired with the sort of I think racial reckoning that we have, and being around my children as much as I was, you know, a lot of it was kind of focused on what kind of legacy, you know, we're receiving. And like you mentioned that your daughters will know the landscape better than you do. You know, your own landscape. I think that's kind of true for like not just the physical landscape, but also sort of the moral and social landscape of where we are. So, you know, that was some of the reckoning that went into that record.
What I love about this new album, Graham's solo album, Truer Picture, is it feels very immediate. It feels very contemporary. It feels very of the moment, emotionally.
It's not going to age well, is it?
It'll age fine. Well, I wrote a lot of this book during the pandemic. I began writing it as a short story, as I said in my comments, in 2013. And I wrote so many bad drafts and so many things that weren't working, and my agent would send it back, and my editor was like, I don't know about this. And then when the pandemic happened, I realized that I wanted this novel to feel very much like how we all felt during the pandemic, which was claustrophobic, which was locally situated. We're looking around at our families, at our communities. The world got smaller, it got quieter. And I tried to reflect the way that I was feeling, like on a day-to-day level, about the world, about my place in it, about my family, and I hope that some of that went into the book. You mentioned your kids. Let's close it out talking about fatherhood a little bit. How do you feel like fatherhood influences your writing?
I mean, for one thing, it's how I pay rent and feed the family. That. So I mean, you know, it's something that, you know, I know that I need to work at it. You know, I mean, songwriting or writing it's work.
Yeah.
I mean, in my life, it's the hardest thing I do.
Yeah.
You know, it's easier than, you know, tearing out a wall, or, you know, I think we were sending pictures of like various renovation projects to each other at one point. Like, I mean, you know, but I think, you know, I just try to stay honest, and I think one thing we do with our children and the parents who I really respect is just try to keep the conversations going. You know, so I think that's a big part of what I shoot for.
Do you feel like your songs, if your kids look back on them, I mean, I don't want to blow you up while you're sitting here, but like your job is a big deal, and I'm sure your kids don't see it as a big deal. It's just like dad makes records, whatever. But do you think when they look back that they're gonna feel like they're in conversation with you in the moment you recorded that song, or they're gonna understand something about you when they hear that song? Is that your hope?
That's my hope. I think when a song is good, that's what it does. You know, you know, a lot of times you can write a song that just has something catchy and hooky, but when a song really has something to it, you know, and usually it's like this for me. Like, I don't know how it is, like how do you judge your own writing? How do you tell when it's...
Oh Lord, most of my writing is based on financial desperation.
Yeah.
I judge it when I know where the hot thing is. If the page feels hot to me and there's enough generative energy to spring it into the next scene, that's when I know I've got something. If I can take what's in this scene and move it to the next scene, that's when I know it's real, that's when I know it's working. And that's also, I was telling my students, maybe not last night, a couple of weeks ago, that's also when I get up. I get up from the desk, because it's hot, and I'm like, oh, I can come back to this desk and it's gonna feel good.
Yeah.
I hate getting up when it's cold, because I'm gonna come back and it's gonna be cold. And I'm gonna lose faith, I'm gonna doubt my project, I'm gonna doubt
that I'm trying to work on.
It's a good feeling.
Yeah, oh my God, it's the best. I was telling my class today, writing is hell, not writing is hell. The only good thing is having written. That's the best. That's the best feeling ever.
Indeed.
You know, think about your kids having an opinion on what you do, and I want to read a little bit about fatherhood and then get you to perform one more song for us if you would. But when I got asked to come back to UNCA and teach some fiction writing classes, my oldest daughter said, "Daddy, you're not a teacher, you're just a writer." There's no mystery or real interest around anything that I do. But I want to read a part of the book where Winston is thinking about kind of the pressures of being a father, and his daughter has suffered this terrible tragedy, and he doesn't know yet that she's going to show up at home and kind of complicate things a little bit, but kind of walk in step with him through this investigation and add her own insights and her own thoughts to it. But she's hurting, and you know, he's a dad, it's the mid-1980s. He doesn't know how to express that hurt really along with her, but he feels it, but he doesn't know how to communicate it. And on the night where he's riding out to the airport, the scene that I just read to you, he's on the way out to the airport. And I don't know how many of y'all have been to Oak Island, North Carolina, but there's a big bridge. And when you get on the bridge from the mainland out to the island, you can see the lighthouse at the end of Yopon Beach, the Yopon Beach Lighthouse. And that figures prominently in the novel, kind of as a landmark. But this was Caswell Beach, I'm sorry, Caswell Beach Lighthouse. This is Winston thinking about his daughter as a child and all the comforting things that he said to her. As he drove across the bridge above the waterway, Winston watched the light from the Caswell Beach Lighthouse at the far eastern end of the island strafe the waterway in perfect increments. It flashed in his rearview mirror, and for a moment he could both see and feel its light in his eyes. When Marie's car climbed to the top of the bridge, the beacon light from the tiny airport appeared through the distant trees on his left. He had been at this exact spot on the bridge at night what must have been 1,000,000 times over the years. And each time he felt like he was leaving the bright gleam of the lighthouse for the tiny spot of the beacon light, a light that was overwhelmed by the darkness of the mainland that waited for him in the woods across the water. When Colleen, his daughter, was a little girl, both when they reached the apex of this bridge and the even taller and more magnificent drawbridge that spanned the Cape Fear River, her voice would come from the back seat, asking, what would happen if we fell from here? And Winston would consider what would cause someone to topple from such a height to the water below. Suicide? A vehicle fire? A bridge collapse? He pictured himself and Colleen holding hands and climbing over the guardrail before leaping into the still waters. No matter how many times she asked, he always answered her question with the same response: I would save you. But as she grew older, her questions became more particular. What would happen if we drove off the bridge? Or what would happen if our car flipped over the side? The more questions she asked, the more her fear became corporeal, and she began to construct detailed stories of the tragedies that would await them. Winston always knew the answers to the questions she had because he had made all of his deputies train, as a matter of fact, for water rescues. The county was dotted with water, lakes, canals, creeks, and waterways disguised as rivers. They had encountered submerged vehicles before, and he pictured himself seat-belted into the driver's seat of a car upside down underwater, Colleen in the back seat. There'd be about 30 seconds before the interior filled with water. He would remove his seatbelt, reach back, do the same to Colleen's. He would pull her into the front seat, and as water poured into the car, he would use the spring-triggered pin on his keychain. He made Marie and all of his deputies carry them to break the window and climb out. He would remind himself to follow the bubbles to the surface, Colleen clutched in his arms, his eyes searching for the light above him while his lungs waited for air. But he didn't explain all of this to Colleen when they passed over bridges during her childhood. Instead, he would look at her in the rearview mirror when she was young enough to sit in the back seat. Or he would turn his head to look at her when she was old enough to sit beside him, the water through her window stretching out below them beneath the bridge. And he would always say the same thing: don't look down, don't look back, just look where we're going. So if you'd
Good
sing us
segue.
out. Yeah, good segue.
Hey, Wiley, congratulations on the book.
Thank you, man.
It's awesome,
Thank you
man.
so
I've read
much.
it twice, and way to go.
Thank you. And Malaprops is here selling books. I'd love to sign all the books y'all have got. Please hang out, say hey. Graham's gonna sing us out. Thank you all so much for coming. I hope you all feel safe being in this huge venue. I never imagined that I would be an arena rock writer. When I told Graham we were gonna be in the basketball auditorium, he said, "Are we gonna have a laser show?" And I said, "I don't think we have that kind of budget, but I can ask if that would be okay." Oh, and you want to take questions before you play?
Sure.
Does anybody have any questions about the book or about for Graham? Oh, you have questions? Okay.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I was gonna ask them here.
Okay.
About time for 2, I think is what they said, or maybe depending on what you guys got. All right. So, first question on here is, at what point did you know you could do this, be a writer, and spend your time devoted to the craft?
At what point did I know I could do this? I would like you to answer this too, Graham. I still don't know that I can do this. I still don't know that I can do this. You know, this is the 4th book I've published. It's the 4th book I've written. I've been very fortunate that I haven't written a whole novel that hasn't been published. I've had ideas that I haven't pursued, so I've been very fortunate along those lines. But I don't know that I can always do this. There may be a time when my editor just doesn't like my idea and doesn't buy it. I don't know. But early on, when my first novel sold, A Land More Kind Than Home, we were living in West Virginia, and I remember my agent calling me and telling me that it sold, and I called my wife Mallory. She was coming home from work, and over the phone I told her, I said, you know, we've got a book, and the dream was always, if I can publish a book, a university in North Carolina will hire me and move us home. That was always the goal. And her job ended up bringing us back here, actually. But we decided at that moment, this is gonna be the best moment, no matter what happens. If this book sells 1 billion copies and we win the Pulitzer Prize and King of the World, this is gonna be the best moment. And so far, when I lose faith, have doubt, get down on myself, see that super, super annoying hashtag, am writing, that other people put on Twitter or whatever when they're writing, and I'm not writing, and I'm like, I'm such a loser. I think about that moment, and I think about how good that felt. What about you?
Awesome. Yeah, well, I mean, I have the great fortune of being in my venture with 5 other guys. So, you know, but as a writer, you know, specifically as a writer, I mean, it's just every time, it just kind of starts again every time somebody comes up and says, this song has meant so much to me, you know? And I mean, writing is the most, it involves more self-doubt than anything than anything I know. So it really, it happens every once in a while when you get a check in the mail.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it happens when people actually come up and tell you that, you know, you've touched them in some way.
Speaking of self-doubt, last night in my creative writing class, I was telling my students how important it is when you have an idea that feels urgent and hot to get it down on the page. And I was giving an example from the novel that I'm working on right now. I have this idea that feels urgent and hot, and I didn't get it down on the page, and I've spent the time since talking myself out of thinking it's a good idea. Where if I had just gotten down on the page, it would exist.
And you could move on.
I could move on, and I could fix it. But now I've talked myself out of ever having the opportunity to fix it.
Wow.
All right. One other question from the audience. This one is somewhat similar. How old were you, and what made you know you wanted to be a writer?
How old was I, and what made me know I wanted to be a writer? I was really fortunate that I'm from a family that encouraged literacy, civic responsibility, those kinds of things. So in my family, you got a library card like at 6. I can remember getting my library card. And I grew up doing 3 things. Shooting basketball in the driveway with my sister. I think she's here tonight, my sister Jada. I don't see her because I can't see anybody.
and playing in the woods and doing dangerous lawsuit games with BB guns and pulleys and machetes and all kind of stuff. Or I read. And reading influenced me so much that I began to wonder how books worked, how was narrative structured. And so, you know, when I was in junior high school, I was certain that Jim Morrison was the greatest poet in American history.
Likewise, yeah.
Likewise, thank you, Graham.
Oh, yeah.
I feel seen. And then I came to UNCA and took a poetry workshop with Rick Chess and realized that not only was Jim Morrison not the greatest poet in American history, I also was not the greatest poet in American history. But I liked writing, and so I took a creative writing workshop with Jeff Rackham, who's since passed away, but he was a big influence on me. But you know, I'd always wanted to write stories. I'd always wanted to do that. What about you?
You know, it wasn't really until I was exposed to kind of writers within the sort of bluegrass acoustic music context that I fell in love with. You know, people like Norma Blake, John Hartford, some of those people like that I really, you know, and the band had a pressing need for songs. Mm-hmm. So it was like, at the time I was a literature major in college, and you know, sort of self-nominated, or nominated by the group actually. So yeah, I really stumbled in it.
Yeah.
And continue to stumble through it.
Some of y'all might not know this, but Graham started Steep Canyon Rangers as an undergraduate at UNC Chapel Hill, and Mike Gugino, who's the band's mandolin player, went to school here at UNC Asheville. Mike and I took some classes together as history classes together here at the university. So, anybody in the audience have any questions they want to shout out about anything, or?
Oh, all the questions they've submitted on here.
Oh, everybody put it. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, great.
Here's an interesting one. What do you think was the moment, as you and Graham discussed, that was a crossing of a boundary of civility that left many Americans feeling injured and unable to rejoin the conversation?
What was that again? I'm sorry.
All right. What do you think was the moment, as you and Graham discussed, that there was a crossing of a boundary of civility that left many Americans feeling injured and unable to rejoin the conversation?
Gosh, I don't know. I think it involved a golden high-rise in New York City and somebody coming down an escalator. That was really the moment for me, when I just thought, I mean, that sounds kind of easy, but to me, that was a comedy show. Like, it was absurd to a degree that it was, I mean, of course the language was hurtful, Mexico sending rapists and murderers and all that stuff that we knew wasn't true, but it was just so absurd. But then when it became reality, that felt to me like a psychic break in the country, where there was a Rubicon that we couldn't cross, for me. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just there's no words that can really bridge that divide. And I mean, I think we keep searching. I think as writers, we keep searching for those words, and I think that's what we have to do.
Yeah.
And maybe you or I or somebody else will find those words. But they've been hard to come by.
Yeah, they've been very hard to come by, to write about that moment and everything after. But I think that was the break.
Cool. I'm being informed we don't have much time left, but thank you everyone for the cues. I hope you liked the A's.
Was there anybody in the audience who wants to shout out a question, who maybe didn't get a question in on the tech? If anybody has one? Anybody? All right. You want to sing us out?
Yeah. So you may recognize the first couple words of this from the last couple words in that section, and I really wanted to write a song about the moment we had talked to earlier, and spoken to about Winston and the secretary, when she kind of realizes that he's, you know, maybe on the other side of the issue from her. I'll get to that one. I'll get to that. I'll write a song about that one these days.
Just do a whole song cycle around the book. That would be fine with me.
It needs a companion album to go with the movie that's coming.
That's right.
Yeah.
We'll see.
All right. Let's see. I call this one Recommend Me. Well, don't look down and don't look back. doubt the hounds are on our track. They're wailing on the nearest hill, but the silent ones are closer still. Oh, love of mine, you can't be sure. I'll say your name before I close this door. And if there's wisdom growing old, I don't want to drink my coffee cold. When they start talking, you'll defend me. When the roll is called, you'll recommend me. Oh. Well, the ocean's more than all these waves. Am I any more than I am this day? And I had hoped that I might wait a while, face the hounds and stand my trial. When they start talking, you'll defend me. When the roll is called, you'll recommend me. Oh. Once I thought that in my arms this world might never do you harm. And all this time I could not see it's you who was protecting me. When they start talking, you'll defend me. When the roll is called, you'll recommend me. When they start talking, you'll defend me. When the roll is called, you'll recommend me. Oh. Thanks for the inspiration.
Thank you all for joining us tonight. Again, Wiley's going to sign books upstairs in the concourse in the Arby's scholarship deck. If you don't already have your book, please see Malaprops in the front entrance to make your purchase. Again, Wiley Cash and Graham Sharp.